Hello, geeks, freaks, and all those unique. I'm Emcee Frodis, and I love movies and television. Unfortunately, I'm also a writer. This means that every time I watch something, I think about what I would have done given the opportunity to work on the project. Which is great when you're a fanfic writer, less great if you want to enjoy watching a movie. But hey, we all have our crosses to bear. I thought this habit would make an interesting series, going over a movie from start to finish, and just how I would have liked to have altered it. Now, a couple of things I would like to make clear. The finished project has to be somewhat recognizable. I'm not nuking it from orbit and starting all over again. I'm also not saying what I'm doing is the best version of the story. It's just the one that happens to appeal to me personally. And I would like to say that I deeply respect anyone who is able to work on a movie or television show, and what I'm doing is really easy compared to them. I'm just standing on their shoulders and calling myself tall, and I don't have any regards for studio edicts or studio limitations. And I'm also gifted with the benefit of hindsight, where I can make mention of things that were not in the production when the original work was done. To show that this is all in good fun, I want to start with a project that I actually quite liked the finished product of. That is 2009's Star Trek film, which introduced us to the Kelvinverse. In Star Trek, the time-traveling Romulan mining vessel, the Narada, attacks the USS Kelvin, resulting in the death of George Kirk and skewing the timeline of his son, James Tiberius Kirk, as well as other future officers of the USS Enterprise, including Spock, Dr. McCoy, and Uhura. After 25 years, the Narada returns to take revenge against Spock, and the newly launched Enterprise must fight against them. I've said many times before that the Kelvinverse is actually my favorite series of Star Trek, and I think the first movie is a very solid action piece that introduces us to new versions of beloved characters, and I think everyone does a really great job. But just because I'm very fond of it doesn't mean there isn't room for improvement. So let's go over what I would improve in this film. And before the comments are flooded with it, yes, in my version there would be less lens flares. I actually think this change alone would change a lot of people's opinions on the movie. You can also assume that there are other small changes like the size of the ship. This is not something I'm really going to focus on because I'm much more about the writing rather than the production. Though the first thing I would like to look at is the cast, and I have absolutely no notes. I think the recasting of everyone is absolutely impeccable. The only one I might potentially recast is Winona Ryder as Amanda Grayson. That's not because of any deficiency in Ryder's performance. I actually quite liked her. However, she's a mere 6 years older than Zachary Quinto, who plays her son Spock. According to the behind-the-scenes commentary, this casting was done because of the initial opening for the movie, which was supposed to be Spock's birth. I'm of two minds when it comes to opening with Spock's birth. I can almost hear the debate that was going on with the producers when it came to whether or not they should cut the scene. It takes place 3 years prior to the schism between the Prime and Kelvin timelines. It's also very sedate compared to the finished product. However, so much of the movie is predicated on the parallel journeys of Spock and Kirk, making them the Lennon and McCartney of the Star Trek universe. Because of this, I'm tempted to put it back in. The scene also sets up Spock's mixed ancestry, which plays heavily into his part. Because of all of this, and being an absolute slut for all things Spock, let's keep Ryder and put this scene back in. I think it will seem like a less jarring opening if we connect this to the destruction of the Kelvin, by instead of fading out on a baby Spock like the deleted scene does, having the camera pan up to the sky and transition into space, and then put your 3 years later card in. The opening of this movie is stellar. It puts us right into the action. It tells a very concise story of the death of George Kirk, and just how this reality is going to be different from the one we've been familiar with for nearly 45 years. I think you really end up caring about George and Winona as they say their goodbyes and aren't interested in knowing what happens to Jim. There's only one alteration I would make in all of this. Nero and his crew would not be head-shaved and tattooed. I think this would help with the complaints that the Romulans looked so different in this than they did on television. The ancillary media actually does provide a reason for this change. The head shaving and face marks are how Romulans convey deep mourning. Nero and his crew tattooed the marks because their mourning will never fade. Because it's so soon after the destruction of Romulus, they haven't had time to do that yet, and doing it later in the movie will help convey the passage of time. Nero is actually one of the best villains in the Star Trek franchise. Eric Bana has no right being as good as he was. I think we would talk about him in the same breath as Khan if they just developed him further. He's the reason for the change in this timeline, so it should really be developed. So along with paralleling Kirk and Spock's development, we can show Nero's descent into villainy. Because of this, in my version of the film, we're going to restore the Romulans being confined to Burra Pentha. Now, I know it may sound currently like I'm just throwing in deleted scenes, but I think these scenes do help explain what Nero was doing during the years between the attack on the Kelvin and the attack on Vulcan. Now let's get into my first big change, the car scene. As a fan of the Beastie Boys and someone who thinks the Swarm scene and beyond is... it kind of hurts me to get rid of this, but this scene is a god-awful waste of time. I think Abrams cut the heart out of this scene by deleting the bit that's actually important to the characters, which is Sam Kirk leaving their abusive uncle's house, and showing that it wasn't just Kirk having daddy issues that made him the way he was, but various events throughout his childhood. Still, I don't think it's the best scene even with the deleted scenes restored. It's a pointless car scene with some gross product placement, and it just does a poor job of really giving us an idea of who Kirk is. So I say we chuck the whole thing out and replace it with something else. As was repeatedly said by the creators, they wanted to mirror Kirk and Spock's upbringings, so I think a scene of Kirk in school would be good. A school scene could also be used to establish the state of Starfleet. Maybe it's like a science teacher talking about how scans of the Narada advanced the technology in Starfleet tenfold. As the teacher drones on, the camera pans over the students, and we see James T. Kirk sitting in the back of the class. If we gotta sneak in the Beastie Boys, and it's J.J. Abrams, so of course we gotta, he's wearing future earpods and listening to Sabotage. But he's looking over his pad, looking at a picture of the Kelvin. The teacher comes up to him, pulls out the earpods, and lectures him on how he thinks he's going to be able to get ahead like this. And Kirk just demolishes the teacher with some impressive technobabble, showing he knows the entire lesson plan backwards and forwards. Kid is smart, but the problem is, he knows it. This leads to a scene with him and Winona. Because why the fuck should Winona's entire role be reduced to just pushing Kirk out of her? You could actually show her as a mother, someone who's struggling to raise 2 children. So have her come to get Kirk when he's gotten into trouble with the principal, making it clear it isn't the first or the 50th time this has happened. She just doesn't know what to do with him, and she can shake her head and say, "If your father were here," and Kirk shoots back, "But he's not here. You're here. If you want to be ashamed of me, don't put it on him," and he walks out on her. Doing this scene this way establishes everything that the car scene does, that Kirk is a troublemaker. But it gives it more depth, showing that Kirk is whip smart. A stack of books with legs, as Gary Mitchell said in Where No Man Has Gone Before. But he has problems with authority. He wants to do things his own way. This leads into the scene of Spock in school, being bullied by the other children. Both this and the Sarek scenes I'm totally good with. I might be tempted to throw in the small cut scene of Sarek and Amanda fighting, as it helps give Amanda more characterization. It also shows that Sarek is still kind of a crappy dad, as he was in the Prime universe, by him being really weird about his son being half human, despite marrying a human. The scene of Spock with the Vulcan Council can remain totally the same. I love every bit of it, from the sweater you just know Amanda knit for Spock, to the sassiest live long and prosper that has ever and will ever be. Like the scene of their births and their childhood scenes, it mirrors Kirk in the bar. We're watching the evolution of these 2 characters into 2 sides of the same coin. While they may approach things very differently, they're still very smart with problems fitting in. This leads us into the bar scene, and most of this is fine. Uhura's introduction is fire. The music playing when she's just owning the room with that saunter. We get exactly who she is, the confidence, her outgoingness as she interacts with others. And then we get the introduction to a grown-up Jim Kirk. And again, it's a good introduction. We're given the red herring that Kirk and Uhura are going to have the romantic subplot, and that works. We also see how Kirk has continued down the path of being an intelligent but brash man. But the breast grab. Yeah, You gotta go. The scene with Pike doesn't have to change. It's one of the most powerful of the movie, and it's why I'll always have a soft spot in my heart for this version of Pike, even if other versions are quickly winning me over. I'm torn by the scene of Kirk seeing the Enterprise. My head says the scene has to go because it doesn't make any sense for the Enterprise to be built on Earth, but my heart says it's a beautiful moment. Since it's a silent moment of Kirk embracing his destiny, and I can't actually think of a good way to do it otherwise, I'm going to allow it. After all, geeks have to have something to complain about, and the Enterprise being too large to be built within orbit seems like a good one. The scene on the transport introducing Bones, Karl Urban is so good, and it's a great meet-cute between Bones and Kirk. We'll keep it mostly the same. However, I will make one small change. Uhura is not on the transport. The movie says it's a transport for new recruits, which she is not, and it confuses a lot of people by thinking she was also the same year as Kirk, rather than the year above. Also, I want to keep the focus on Kirk and Bones here. To start the shift of scenes 3 years in the future to the present of the movie, we'll start with Nero escaping from Europentha. Having a prison breakout allows us to have an action beat that we haven't had since the opening scene. It also allows the audience to know what's going on with Nero, again beefing up his character. And it's only here we'll see the true evolution of him into the villainous Nero, head shaving and tattooed, fully embracing his grief as he escapes from the Klingons and gets his ship back. You might be getting bored thinking, oh, Emcee likes this movie too much. She doesn't want to change anything. It's only like small bits here and there. Well, buckle up, buttercups. This is where things are going to change. We do not need a scene in Uhura's dorm. We do not need to see her and Gala in their underpants.
Underpants!
What we do need is more scenes at the Academy. A longer scene with McCoy. Urban is so good as McCoy. Let's not waste him. So let's have the scene in the library. McCoy is just surrounded by pads. He is just reading everything he can get his hands on. Kirk is like he was in the earlier school scene. He's listening to music. Let's say this is where he eats the apple that every asshole in movies eats, rather than during the actual Kobayashi Maru test. Kirk eventually rolls his eyes and takes out his earpods. He asks, why are you studying so hard? You're already a doctor. Yeah, and it's 10 times harder doing that on a starship. It's not just about treating sick patients. I gotta relieve officers of duty, be able to work under heavy fire. The question is, why aren't you studying? Aren't you doing that damn test again? Did I just do a McCoy impersonation? It's really hard to say McCoy lines without doing the accent. Third time's the charm. Speaking of charm, Kirk sidles his way over to Uhura, who is talking to Spock. I never much cared for the idea that Kirk and Spock never managed to cross paths before the Kobayashi Maru. It also makes things very hard for tie-in writers, so let's chuck that out. They don't have to know each other extremely well, but let's just have them know each other a little bit. Kirk gets up close to Uhura. Here you're on my comm tomorrow. If I beat the test, will you tell me your name? Betting goes against the uniform code, Mr. Kirk. Oh, relax, Professor. That is a misnomer, Cadet, as I am not a professor. The few courses I have been an instructor in have been as a teacher's assistant. Lieutenant. He thinks he's being funny, and any bet is safe, because you're going to fail. We'll see about that. Kirk jogs away, slinging an arm around Gala. How's my favorite girl? Confused as to why you were flirting with my roommate? I didn't mean anything by it. And Kirk saunters off with Gala. So this scene does a couple of things. One, the characters aren't in their fucking underwear for no reason. It also sets up more of a dynamic between the characters. It also adds in the information that Spock was just a grad student, not a professor, because, well, considering what one of my favorite elements is in the Kelvinverse, it's a pretty major point to be buried in ancillary media. Doing it this way makes it a little less creepy, so let's put it right out there in the open. For the Kobayashi Maru scene, I'd like Kirk to be less... I'd just like him to be less. I know what they were trying to do, but I don't think they had to go in so hard on it. Eating the apple of the assholes, doing the finger guns. He just comes off as so incredibly unlikable. And really unnecessarily, too. I think there's a balance that needs to be struck in making this Kirk a more reckless version of the Prime universe. But that doesn't mean having him be an arrogant asshole. So I'd like to see him taking the test super seriously. And I'd like his cheating to not seem like such an easy and quick turnaround. It should seem seamless. The other cadets slowly realize that they're winning. And at the very end, Uhura says, eyes wide, all passengers from the Kobayashi Maru have been saved. And then Kirk can be a little bit arrogant. All passengers from the Kobayashi Maru have been saved. Captain. Which goes into the next scene, the disciplinary scene. But I'd like to scale this back. I don't understand why we needed to have all of the cadets there. In First Duty, it was just a small office, and they were dealing with someone who had died. I understand the need for cinematics, so instead, let's parallel this scene with Spock's Vulcan High Council scene. Kirk standing alone in front of a bunch of Starfleet officials, sitting up on high. The bulk of the scene can stay the same. Kirk is accused of cheating on the Kobayashi Maru and is confronted by Spock about it, and they get into their back and forth about the no-win scenario. Here is the big difference. At the end of this version, instead of being cut off by the attack on Vulcan, there is a verdict reached. Admiral Tyler Perry confers with the rest of the council and then says, "We've made a decision. Cadet Kirk, the council finds you guilty of cheating." And then there's a shot of Spock, who has that little Vulcan kind of tiny smirk on his face. "And we've placed a commendation on your file for your innovative thinking." Spock then looks surprised. "Admiral, I believe I misheard you." Cadet Kirk uncovered a flaw within our simulation, one which he was able to use to his advantage. His outside-the-box thinking should be commended. This will only encourage other cadets to cheat. Then perhaps you should work with the cadet to close the loophole. And Kirk gives Spock what can only be described as a shit-eating grin. I don't want to go directly from the hearing to the cadets going to Vulcan. Everything is unnecessarily compressed. So instead, we're going to have another scene of Narada. There's actually a scene in the movie that I've so far not included, and that's Nero seeing the jellyfish arrive. And this would be the moment for that to happen, because it kicks off the true conflict in trying to save Vulcan. It doesn't need to be anything more than the scene that is in the actual movie, but it serves as a break in the Academy scenes to imply that some time has passed. By separating these scenes, we actually do have space to put in another establishing scene, deepening the characters and their connections. So in this scene, we've got Kirk and McCoy walking through the campus. Jim is on his pad. Just got a message from Gary Mitchell. He's on rotation on the Saratoga, but he heard about the Kobayashi Maru. Word travels fast. It's the only thing people want to talk about, though. Not how I'm going to graduate in this place in 3 years, top of the class. He throws his arms out in triumph. McCoy rolls his eyes. Are you really that needy for praise? Always, Kirk grins. Lay it on me. He jumps onto McCoy and is trying to move his jaw with his hands. Jim, you're the best. I wish I was as smart and cool as you. Get off me. McCoy pushes Kirk off. You're not doing too badly, Kirk said. Heard a rumor Puri wants you as secondary medical officer on the Enterprise. It's not official yet, McCoy replied. What about you? Do you know where you're going to be posted? Kirk shakes his head. I think someone's getting in the way. He glances over at Spock, who's crossing the campus. You know he tried to overturn the decision twice? Vulcans don't like it when you break the rules. His rules need to be broken sometimes. And the camera follows Spock as he's walking, stopping in front of Uhura, who's listening to something on what can only be described as comically large headphones. Her eyes are closed, and there's just a split second of focus on Spock as he's watching her. But he carefully removes the headphones and makes Uhura start. Lieutenant! Spock gestures to his cuffs. Lieutenant Commander. I was promoted. Captain Pike has asked me to be the XO of the Enterprise. Uhura makes a move like she's going to hug him, but stops. Congratulations, Commander Spock. Another moment where the look is just a little too long. Congratulations to you as well. You, of course, will be one of the junior communications officers, Lieutenant Uhura. I got it. Uhura doesn't resist hugging him now. Spock seems unsure where to put his hands, and after a moment, he pulls back out of the hug. Of course he did. You possess an unparalleled ability to identify sonic anomalies in subspace transmission tests. I bet you say that to all the girls. Why would I do that? Your skills are, as said in your report, unparalleled. Such a superlative applies only to you, especially given that despite passing all your exams, you are still listening to transmissions. Yeah, I picked up one last night from the Klingon prison planet, Rapentha. It sounds like they were attacked. Fascinating. For a moment, it seems like they may kiss. But Spock's communicator beeps. Spock takes it out and looks at it. And then Uhura's communicator beeps. Then every single communicator on the campus is beeping. They share a worried look, this beeping noise echoing through the air. Next scene, Spock is trailing behind Pike, who is giving the basics of what's going on. There is a strange phenomenon happening near Vulcan. Spock reminds Pike that he still hasn't selected a third officer, but Pike says he was just waiting for the board to approve his choice. A transport opens, and Kirk appears. Lieutenant James T. Kirk, reporting for duty. I will defend the Kelvinverse to the ends of the earth, but I absolutely cannot defend how Kirk got into the ship and eventually his rise to the captaincy. It was dumb! I try to ignore it as much as possible because I really do like this movie, but putting Kirk on probation, thus grounding him, makes no sense. There's no tension because he's on the ship within the next scene. And the way he gets onto the ship is ludicrous and makes McCoy look like a terrible doctor and eats up runtime that could be spent on more important scenes. So not only did Kirk not get penalized for the Kobayashi Maru incident, it inspires Pike to make him third officer. Something Spock is not going to be very happy about, but will express in a very Vulcan way, walking alongside Pike towards the bridge. Captain, I fail to understand why you wish for Lieutenant Kirk to serve as your third officer. His flouting of the rules deem him an illogical choice. I'm standing right here. Prepare the bridge crew to leave space dock, Lieutenant Kirk. Once he's gone, Captain Pike looks very seriously at Spock. I know you've got issues with the kid, but I need you to get along with him. He's one of the best the Academy's got. He might bend the rules, but I need someone who thinks like that. I've got you to keep him in check. I believe you are allowing your personal attachment to influence your opinion. You want to walk past the communication officers with me and say that? There's just a flicker of shock across Spock's face. You know? Of course I know. Spock recovers quickly. I would never recommend anyone for the crew who was not the best for the position. I know that, but you have to trust that I'd do the same. The scene on the bridge can remain mostly the same. I don't have any big issues with it, except obviously in this version, Kirk will be on the bridge too. But it was a very good introduction for Sulu and Chekhov, and it gives us a reason for the Enterprise's delay. Now we need to figure out how to get everything together. In this version of the movie, I don't have Kirk overhear Uhura talking about the Romulans escaping the Klingons, but I think there's a pretty easy way around that. We make it not about Kirk. There's plenty of stuff where he gets to be the hero. This doesn't have to be about him. Uhura is down in the communication banks. She hears Chekhov's message and starts to murmur to herself about what's going on. She then gets up and sprints to the bridge. Lieutenant, what are you doing? What's happening to Vulcan? It's not a natural disaster. The description of what's happening perfectly matches the transmissions I intercepted from Rapentha. The Klingons were attacked by an advanced Romulan ship that appeared out of a lightning storm. Kirk finishes for her, the weight of it hitting him. It's the same ship that attacked the Kelvin. From here, the scene would play out basically the same as in the movie. Uhura ends up becoming Chief Communications Officer because of her ability to speak Romulan. The one change I would make is I wouldn't completely destroy the fleet. Even with their advanced systems, I don't think the Narada could take out everyone so quickly. But they would be severely damaged, if not destroyed. I think a shot of Uhura hearing multiple distress signals would be very creepy. I think we can keep most of this next scene the same. I mean, hello Christopher, I'm Nero. Obviously, we'll take out the bit about Kirk not belonging, since in this version he's actually the third officer on the ship officially. But other than that, just huge chunks of this can stay the same. It's a good action set piece, it utilizes Sulu well, and pays homage to the Naked Time. And as much as I love Vulcan, I think destroying it was the boldest move this movie could make, and it was a very effective one. Nothing in this world would ever be the same because this vital part of Star Trek lore is gone. The loss of his planet and his mother is also such a blow to Spock, in a way that absolutely nothing else could be. This whole center point of the movie is very well done. I would not change anything from it. The next part I would make a small bitty change is the turbolift scene. You know I'm absolutely here for these two. But there's one small thing I would do. I would have Spock make the first move. Uhura comes in, stops the turbolift, says, I'm so sorry, and silently, hands slightly trembling, Spock would raise 2 fingers to her, and Uhura would meet them with her own, before going to kiss him. Then the scene would continue as before. This was actually the way the scene was supposed to originally go, but J.J. Abrams thought it would be too confusing to audiences. And I say fuck it, bring on the finger kiss. I trust new viewers to pick up from context what's going on. I mean, come on. Did people who saw Journey to Babel understand what Sarek and Amanda were doing? No, they figured it out. I love the scene where the crew breaks down what's going on, figuring out that the timeline is skewed. It utilizes basically the entire cast, and they really start to gel together. There's just one major problem with that, and it's the ending. So, Kirk was not only not a member of the Enterprise crew, he's actively insubordinate to the captain. Jesus fucking Christ. Honestly, I love this movie, but why? This is such an unnecessary way to get Kirk into the captain's chair. It just makes him look like an asshole. Kirk cannot agree with Spock's plan, but it doesn't have to get to the point of marooning. It can be Kirk is disagreeable, but what Spock says goes because he's the fucking captain. So much of what I'm trying to do with this rewrite is make Kirk's rise to the captaincy make more sense. There's always going to be a stretch in credibility, but it doesn't have to be so ridiculously blatant. But we do need to get Scotty and Spock Prime into the story, which requires having Kirk leave the Enterprise for a time. So instead of being marooned, let's say the Enterprise was damaged in the brief skirmish with the Narada. It can't get back to Earth. It can't get anywhere. Their only hope of potentially repairing the ship is getting a warp coil from a nearby repair outpost. No one's getting abandoned on a rando ice planet. In fact, it's the opposite of abandoned. It's the only place the few ships that survived Nero's attack can go, and it's been flooded with injured crew members from other ships. Because of this, McCoy will go with Kirk in Galileo 7, piloted by young Chekhov, who, as we find out in Generations, possesses some field first aid. Let's give these two something to do. They get to the outpost, and there are just dozens of injured Starfleet officers. Since we don't have the action set piece of Kirk running away from the monster, let's instead have a dramatic medical scene of McCoy jumping in to save someone. No one has asked him to do it, but he gets all business, taking care of the injured crewmen. We're talking some absolutely vintage McCoy gruff miracle doctor, with Chekhov helping him out. Kirk is a bit agog watching him work. Once he's done, McCoy slumps back, exhausted, and we hear a very familiar voice. It has been too long since I've seen that. McCoy looks up. And just who in the hell asked you, you pointed-ear hobgoblin? And then we see Spock Prime. I could have gone longer without hearing that. And he looks between the young men. Leonard McCoy, Pavel Chekhov, James T. Kirk. Then there can essentially be a version of the Spock Prime scene, just on the station. Spock Prime and Kirk can walk away, leaving McCoy and Chekhov to tend to the wounded. Spock Prime mind melds with Kirk to explain what's going on. Scotty is an irritated lieutenant in charge of the repair station being flooded by injured people. Of course, Spock Prime recognizes him and recruits him on Kirk's behalf, which really works out, seeing as Olsen still dies on the platform in this version, and the warp coils need to be repaired. And everyone, save Spock Prime of course, can return to the Enterprise with absolutely no incident, because Scotty being stuck in random tubes on the Enterprise is so fucking stupid. So stupid. We also don't have transwarp beam or whatever bullshit. So Scotty goes to repair the warp coils, and Kirk and Spock can figure out what the next move of the Enterprise is. And of course, this is a huge moment, because there's something I didn't mention that we're changing from the Spock Prime scene. Spock Prime doesn't tell Kirk to provoke Spock. It is hugely, hugely sketchy of him to do it. One of the big missions of this script is getting Kirk to the captaincy in something resembling a reasonable chain of events. It's not perfect, but it's the best we can do with what we're working with. We've managed to have Kirk not commit mutiny up until now, and I'd like to stick with that. I also don't think it's necessary. I think that these two have enough problems that they can get into it all on their own. They're trying to figure out their next move. Spock wants to fall back. The Enterprise has been damaged and needs to rejoin the fleet. But Kirk knows that Nero is going to go to Earth next. They're in the best shape of any of the ships in the fleet. They're the only hope to stop him. And Spock is like, we have to rejoin the fleet. We have to be logical about this, Lieutenant. Why should we be logical? Nero's not. You'll never understand him. He's fueled by grief and anger, and he won't stop until everyone feels like him. But you won't. He's going to destroy Earth, take away the home, the family of almost everyone on this ship. You just went through that. Lost your planet, lost your mother. Did you even notice she was gone? And then it can be a very similar speech to the one Kirk gives in the movie. Maybe not as calculated, more off the cuff, focused on Kirk being angry as well. But it ends up the same. Spock ends up attacking Kirk, and then he steps down from the captaincy due to his emotional compromise. And the big difference at the end of this is that Kirk is surprised when he ends up as captain. He's a bit wide-eyed, looking around, uncertain about what he's supposed to do. But after a moment, he takes a deep breath, and he goes to sit in the captain's chair. And we see Captain Kirk start to come out. He becomes calm, decisive, and brave. From here, I think the movie pretty much plays out in the same way it happens in the finished film. I think the third act is actually pretty solid. The one small change I might make is including the part in the novelization where Uhura is fitting Kirk and Spock with translators to explain what the hell she's actually doing in the transporter scene, other than making out with Spock, and having her name be revealed. I mean, don't get me wrong, fucking love that scene, but it would be nice to have it be more sensical. But other than that, I think we're really good for the final act. As I said in the beginning of this video, I'm a huge fan of Star Trek 09. It's one of my favorite Star Trek movies, and it's responsible for getting me into the Star Trek fandom. But seeing as I've spent the last 30 minutes making changes here and there to it, I do think there's a lot that could be polished up. Still a great movie, just one that could have used a bit more work on it. So comment down below with what you think of my rewrite of Star Trek 09. What other movies would you like to see me rewrite in the future? Before you mention some more difficult movies to cover, one of them is actually a Patreon goal. Once I hit my next goal on Patreon, I'll be doing a video rewrite of Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. So be sure to support me over on Patreon. You can also support me by buying my geeky designs over on Redbubble and TeePublic. You can also buy me a coffee. So until next time, live long and may the Force be with you.